William Foster and his wife Sarah were on their way to a party at her sister's house in Pennsylvania. It was her sister Edna's 30th birthday. Sarah and Will have been together for 4 years and married for 3. She was a pretty girl with dark hair and gray eyes, a slender figure, and a pleasant smile. She was 26 and a teacher at a private school near their home in Virginia. Will was 30, a lawyer, and an average-looking guy with brown hair and eyes and a wiry build. So far, he has achieved good results in law. They met while he was studying at the Faculty of Law, and upon graduation they moved in together. A spark flew between them. The sex was good from the start, and still is. Will was happily married, and so was Sarah. Before she met Will, she was sexually active, even more than he was. Only one guy impressed her in bed as much as Will. It was her former beau, Jed Blake. Jed was her first. They broke up when they each went to college, but dated at home during the summers. When Sarah met Will, she stayed for the summer to be close to him. After that, she didn't see Jed, who moved to Philadelphia on the other side of the state. The party was scheduled for 7 o'clock on Saturday, and Will and Sarah arrived early in the morning. They stayed overnight in a guest room. Soon, Sarah and Edna's parents arrived with sandwiches for lunch. It was Neville and Elizabeth Stroman. He was a cool investment and finance specialist, and she was a volunteer. They were 58 and very cheerful. They challenged Will and Sarah to a tennis match on the court at the back of the house. It was a large house with a large garden and a tennis court. When they went out to the match, Sarah warned Will that her father hated losing. That's what he understood. He himself was the same. He rarely saw her family. The reason for this was a busy schedule and distance. They spent several holidays with them. One summer, they were vacationing on the beach in Delaware. "Do you want me to throw the match?" "Fine. No. Please just play." Sarah was a good tennis player, and her mother Liz was a very good tennis player. Neville was long and looked strong. Will was an ordinary, wiry man, 5'10", skinny. Growing up, he didn't play tennis in his neighborhood. No courts. Basketball courts only, baseball fields. There was a ping-pong table in the recreation center. So he was familiar with rackets. He played tennis in college and law school. The match took place at a normal pace. Because of Edna's 2 children, the grandchildren won the first set with a score of 6.3. But Will saw that Neville was slow and didn't have a backhand. Will wasn't slow at all, and he was much stronger than he seemed. He began to play to his strengths and Neville's weaknesses. She and Sarah won the second set 6-2, and the third one is 6-1. The first one was a gift. Will and Sarah shook hands with their families. Neville was hardly polite. Liz smiled at Will. She was a pretty woman, with gray hair but slim and, oddly enough, seductive. Will had noticed this before, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Edna's husband Joseph watched the last set. He returned with Will and Sarah. He said, "Dad will survive this, right?" Sarah replied, "Maybe. With time." She looked at Will. "You could hold back a little. He would lose respect for me." Joe laughed. Sarah didn't laugh. Joe said, "Sarah, guess who's invited tonight?" "Who?" "Your old friend, Jed." Will looked at Sarah. She slowed down. "Oh, Joe, who did this? He's in Philadelphia." "No, he returned 6 months ago. He works for your father." She said, "At least someone told me." "I just said. I'm sure after all these years you have a lot to make up for." Joe was a troublemaker. Sarah answered, "No." Will watched this exchange with interest, trying not to show it. He knew the role Jed played in Sarah's life. Without worrying too much, he wondered if he had any reason to worry. He decided to watch. Will and Sarah took a shower. She was the last one to leave. She was drying herself with a towel when he pushed her onto the bed. She giggled. She tried to push him away. It was a semi-serious attempt, but it failed. They made love. Afterwards, they both returned to the shower. The party wore casual clothes. Will was dressed in khakis and a short-sleeved work shirt. Sarah brought a red and white striped dress and sandals. But when she followed Will downstairs, she was wearing a more elegant blue dress. Will hadn't seen him before. He asked, "Why such a change? And where did it come from?" Sarah blushed slightly. I borrowed it from Edna. I didn't really like red. Is this related to this guy, Jed? No. It seems the lady protests too much. Will said it with a slight undertone, but they both knew he was serious. Okay, I want to impress him, so you want to impress him? Yes, Sarah, I don't want any problems. Please believe me when I say that I will not tolerate any embarrassment from you and Jed. This will be a really big problem. I understand you. I'll have to be friendly with him, but nothing more. Will nodded. He didn't believe what she just said at all. His face was stony, and she caught it. I promise. I promise. He turned and went to the keg and took the beer. Half a glass, the only alcohol of the night. His motto was, always be prepared. But he was not a Boy Scout. Sarah was glad that Jed would come to the party. She saw that Will was worried. Perhaps she shouldn't have dressed up so revealingly, but she wanted to make an impression. In reality, her intentions were mostly innocent. Some vague plans were swarming in her head. Either way, maybe Jed will be fat now. He wasn't fat. He came alone at about 7:15. Neville met him at the door and they shook hands. Will watched them from the far corner of the large room, sipping from a glass of beer. Inside was over 6 feet, broad shoulders, slender hips, long blonde hair, and brown eyes. Will was angry with him from the moment he saw him. Sarah walked up to Jed as he walked past her father. They hugged. Nothing alarming, just a greeting. Will heard Jed say, "Wow, Sarah, I'm poorly dressed." On Jed there were dock workers and a short-sleeve shirt. Sarah replied, "No, I only wanted..." Her father said, "To make you look good." Sarah took Jetta by the hand and said, "Let me introduce you to Will." Will pushed away from the wall he was leaning on and waited for Sarah and Jed to cross the room. Sarah said, "Jed, this is my husband, Will. Will, this is my old friend, Jed." Jed held out his hand and Will took it. And, without noticing it, Jed began to squeeze her tightly. Will smiled at him, squeezed him back and said, "This should not have been expected." It seemed illogical to everyone except him and Jed. Jed released his hand and the handshake ended. They looked at each other for a long time. Will was still smiling, but Jed was not. Sarah was not stunned by the scene. She thought that both of them would behave politely, but it was not there. She said, "Come on, Will, let's go eat." She led him past Jed and her mother, who had appeared during the altercation. As they walked towards the dining room where the tables were already set, Sarah asked, "Can't you be polite?" "I could, only he tried to crush my tender hand. That's why I said what I said. Please stay away from him, Sarah. This handshake was an announcement of sorts. I'm really sorry. I didn't understand. Did he offend you?" Will looked at her. He shook his head. He said, "Be careful, Sarah. This guy is nothing but trouble. Maybe in a package that is attractive to you, but in trouble. And I won't play with him." Sarah knew what this meant. By his upbringing, Will did not belong to the upper or even middle class. He meant that he would go after Jed if there was any reason. Any reason. This made Sarah very excited. Sarah said, "Dad says Jed takes self-defense classes and that he won the tournament. Does that mean he's going to beat me up and take you away?" "It will not happen." "Then why say this? I wanted to warn you not to cause trouble." They put down the plates. The food was delicious, but Will ate little and drank water. He and Sarah went outside with food. Sarah began talking to her school friends who were close to both sisters. She introduced Will to them, and they talked for a few minutes. Nobody mentioned Jed. Obviously, this was due to Will's presence. He walked around the corner, and he stopped within earshot. After about a minute, one of the women said, "Sarah, your ex-dream boyfriend is here, and he's still handsome." Sarah replied, "I noticed, but I need to stay away from him. You girls don't let him get bored, right?" One replied, "I'd like to keep him busy, but Johnny might object." Everyone laughed. Then the man himself appeared. Will heard him say, "Hello, ladies. You all look great." There was a giggle. Sarah replied, "Thank you, Jed." More giggles. Will walked back around the corner. Jed put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Will stood behind them. One of the women cleared her throat. Sarah jumped to the side. Will said, "Sarah, let's go for a walk." He pulled her along with him. When they were out of earshot, Will said, "Listen, Sarah, if you want this guy, tell me, and I'll go home and start the divorce." "Will, I don't want any divorce. You're overreacting. As soon as I was out of sight, he hugged you. I didn't notice how you pushed him away. I'm attracted to him. He looks great. You know our history. But I will not do anything. Good, because I love you. And if he messes up, he'll pay. Oh, he'll pay. And you too. You understand?" "Yes. Do not threaten me. Don't be silent with me." Sarah music began to sound in the house. Will and Sarah went to where a dance floor had been set up on the tennis court. Once they were there, Will whirled Sarah around in a waltz. He danced great, and so did she. There were only two other couples dancing, so there was plenty of room for grand steps. When the waltz ended, Will bowed to Sarah. She curtsied back. The next song was a fast rock song. Will and Sarah immediately went at it, with enthusiasm and smooth movements. There were more and more people. When the slow number began, Will pulled Sarah close to him, placing her head on his shoulder, and felt the touch. It was Jed trying to break in. Sarah froze, but Will turned his head and said, "Later, not now. This is not at all polite." He spun Sarah around in a dance. Jed turned and walked away. Liz and Neville noticed this. Neville liked Jed, who he thought was better suited to Sarah. Liz was not amused by Jed's antics and thought he was taking a big risk. She was a lustful woman who was increasingly frustrated by her husband. But she knew one thing. If she had to choose between Jed and Will to get him into her bed, she would definitely choose Will. He was a bad boy and Jed was not. She thought it quite possible that Jed would learn a hard lesson today. She just hoped Sarah wouldn't learn that lesson either. After the slow dance, Will took Sarah inside to get something to drink. She took the wine, and he took the water. They went outside, walked around the house, and sat down at a table next to the dance floor. About 15 minutes later, Sarah said, "Here he comes again." Will looked. Jed was walking towards them. He asked Sarah to dance. Will didn't answer, and Sarah didn't look at him as she took Jed a hand. They danced a fast rocker. Will had to smile at Jed's mechanical dancing. But then a slow song came on, and they began to dance to the confident separation apparently imposed by Sarah. So far, so good. Will saw Jed try to pull her closer. She put her hand on his chest and said something. He relaxed, and they began to dance. Liz came and sat next to him as he watched. She said, "Will, please don't touch this man." She hurt him. "I'm so sorry, Liz. I won't hurt him unless he deserves it." She said, "Let's dance." Will led her to the floor, and they danced until the slow song ended. The rock started playing, and Liz took Will's hand and spun him around. He smiled, and they danced back and forth. The dance was not chaste, but not completely depraved either. When the song ended, they returned to the table where Sarah sat with Jed. Jed was in Will's place. Will sat down next to Liz. He looked at Sarah. Sarah said, "Mom, please leave my husband alone." She laughed. Liz replied, "If he is not busy with something else, then he is in the game." The music resumed, and Will pulled Sarah away from Jed and onto the floor. They danced 2 fast numbers, and when the slow dance came, Will pulled her towards him. He said, "Jed can't dance." Sarah laughed. "I never could. No rhythm. That's why I married you and not him." Meanwhile, Edna and Joe arrived, and Edna asked Jed to dance. Joe invited Liz to take a spin. Jed and Edna looked like puppets, but Joe and Liz looked like professionals. Will and Sarah watched from the table as the slow number ended. Will said, "Your mother is a real woman. How does your dad manage to do everything?" "Probably doesn't have time." "Hey, Sarah, let's go to bed." "It's almost midnight. I don't want to get up yet. You can go." "Fine. Do not forget." He went upstairs to their room. It overlooked a side yard that was not lit. Will took a shower. He returned to the room. He was hungry. On the table in the hall, he saw round chocolate Easter candies. He carried the tray into the room. There were 6 of them, the size of baseballs. They were spiked like a baseball and quite heavy. He looked at them and decided to refuse. He returned to the bathroom and looked out the window onto the dance floor. Sarah and Jed were slow dancing. This time, she didn't stop him. There was a veranda in front of their room, and he could watch them from there without being noticed. He loved Sarah, but if she was going to get lost, he left her. The events of the evening calmed him enough to go upstairs and leave her. Now maybe that was a mistake. He watched as the 2 of them walked out into the side yard and into the darkness. Sarah's blue dress stood out against Jed's white shirt. Will opened the doors to the bedroom porch. There was no light behind him. He left. Sarah and Jed stood with their backs to the barn, in the shadows. Apparently they had secluded themselves there. Will got angry. He'd had enough. He saw Jed and Sarah hugging each other. Jed kissed her. Then they allowed themselves too much. Will was about 40 feet away. He could see. He had an idea. He returned to the house and took a tray of chocolates. He carried it out onto the porch. Will took one of the chocolates. He was a good pitcher in school and played adult baseball for several years. He sent the chocolate ball flying and then threw it at them. Sarah rose to her feet and walked back, past the metal awning, towards the empty dance floor. Will took pity. The 6th chocolate ball hit the wall of the aluminum shed, making an incredible crash that echoed throughout the yard. Sarah covered her ears, screamed, and turned the corner. Will looked at Jed. A light came on in the side yard. Will was still standing on the porch in complete darkness. He saw what Jed looked like, covered in a white, creamy filling, interrupted by streaks of chocolate. Neville and Joe came out. They stopped and stared at Jed. It was naked and covered in creamy filling. Now he was moving. He began to crawl. As he got down on his hands and knees, cream started dripping from him. Neville shouted, "For God's sake, boy, what did you do to my daughter? Cover yourself." Liz walked around the corner. Will heard the door slam behind him and assumed Sarah had gotten inside. Liz looked around. Turning around, she looked at the splashes on the barn. She turned and looked straight at Will. Will doubted she could see him, but she still knew. Will became more and more emaciated by Liz. He was completely still, watching her. She smiled. She signaled, "Okay," and turned to deal with the 3 men. Will slipped back into the room. He took the dish into the hall. Then he stopped and put it in the bathroom cabinet under the towels. From the bathroom, he watched as Joe and Liz supported Jed and led him around the corner. Neville followed them, still hissing. Will slipped back into the bedroom, closed the porch door, and climbed into bed. He buried his head in the pillows and began to laugh as quietly as possible. He realized that they would soon come for him, and he wanted to let out as much laughter as possible before they arrived. Over time, he was sure he would become sad. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on the door and Liz slipped inside. She whispered, "I know that you woke up." Will stood up. He looked at Liz. She said, "Chocolate baseballs." She started giggling. Will asked, "Where did they come from?" "It was a Little League event held by a local pastry chef." "Sorry, Will. I watched them but went out to see the guests off, and they were already gone." "What's happened?" "When I left, she looked fine. She has something for this guy." "Of course. Maybe not now." She started laughing again. He got out of bed. He was wearing sports shorts and a t-shirt. Liz stared at him. "I was hoping for less." "Liz, stop it. You might succeed." "I want to succeed. If I try, it will work out. I know. I'm in your power. I never thought. But no matter how tempting it may be, not now. Let's." He followed her downstairs. Joe, Edna, and Sarah were sitting at the kitchen table. Sarah lowered her eyes. She was wearing a robe. Will asked, "What's happened?" There was no answer. "Sarah, what happened?" "We were attacked. On me and Jed. Please explain. We were in the side yard. Maybe we kissed. Sorry." Then something started exploding. It put us to sleep. It was terrible. She started crying. "Where is Jed?" Edna replied. "His clothes are ruined. I gave him something to wear." But I'm not sure he'll come down. No men's clothing suits him. He's too big. Jed just showed up. He was wearing a shapeless cape. Perhaps it was a beach blanket. It was purple with pink flowers. Everyone stared at Jed, who was blushing deeply. Will picked up his phone and discreetly took a photo. Jed looked at Will intently. "What did you do?" "What did you do, Jed?" "Listen, nothing special. It shouldn't have gone too far." "I heard it went too far. And when you get better, maybe you and I will have a good talk about this." "Do you want to fight?" "I'm in. It doesn't hurt so much that I can't handle your ass." Edna said, "Guys, stop it." She turned to her mother. Liz smiled. She didn't say anything. Edna said, "Mom, say something." Liz replied, "What do you say, Sarah? Are these two guys going to fight for you? Is this what you want?" Sarah was still crying. "No, I want Will. Today I was wrong." Will said, "I wasn't going to fight for her hand, Liz. I just wanted to kick this asshole's ass." Will stood up. He began to leave the house towards the tennis court. He looked over his shoulder. "Come on, Jed. Take off your dress, and we'll get down to business." Liz started laughing. Will later decided that the laughter was caused by the need to support the quarrel. Sarah said, "Will, please. He is so big. Please." Jed tried to imitate Will. "Yes, I'm so big. You know what she means?" Will stood at the door. He turned. "Are you coming, idiot? It's time to shut up or put up." He went outside. Jed still didn't move. Will waited. Jed turned and walked out the front door. His blanket flapped behind him. When he left, Will returned to the kitchen. "Here's Big Jed for you. He's a weakling. I must say I'm very disappointed. What about you, Sarah?" Sarah replied, "Maybe he's just a good guy." "Nope. Weakling. What do you think, Liz?" She smiled. Weak Edna did not share her mother's sense of humor. She silently watched all this. She said, "It was all so medieval, not civilized." Liz replied, "But so exciting." "Hey, Sarah." Will says, "Did someone call the police?" Edna says, "No, we didn't know what happened. Probably criminals from the alley near the yard. They'll never catch them and our insurance will go up." Will left, going upstairs. "I'm going back to bed." He wondered what Sarah would do. He wondered what to do with Sarah. He needed an adrenaline rush after that almost fight. He had only been in the room for 2 minutes when there was a soft knock and Sarah poked her head inside. "Can I come in?" "Certainly." She was wearing a robe and was barefoot. She shuffled towards the bed. "Forgive me, Will. I don't know why I mean, he's a memory. He looked real to me. Real enough to kiss my wife as soon as my back is turned. We didn't get far before you were rudely interrupted, but you would go far. I heard that he was naked when the incident happened. It's more than just a kiss. How could you do this? It was exciting. That's all. It was exciting. They made love." Meanwhile, Liz and Edna quietly followed Sarah up the stairs to see what would happen. They stopped when Sarah entered the room and then crept toward the door. Soon they heard sounds. Liz and Edna quietly left. Edna went to her bedroom and woke up Joe. Liz left Neville alone. When she turned to go to her room, Will was standing behind her. She gasped, "Where did you come from?" You know she dragged him into a spare room and made love to him. Liz said, "I told you I'd get to you. I'm so glad you were right. Go back to your wife." Will crept back to his room. Sarah seemed to be already asleep. He went to bed and slept soundly until the morning. The next morning, Sarah and Will took a shower. They were still hesitant with each other. Bacon, eggs, and toast were cooking downstairs. Edna looked refreshed as she cooked. Joe came in from the street. He also looked refreshed. Soon Liz and Neville arrived. Neville was grumpy. Liz wasn't there. Neville said, "I never thought that Jed was such a scoundrel. I still can't understand what happened." Will said, "When I saw him in a dress, everything became clear to me. He struggles with his true self." Will was still in revenge mode towards Jed. Neville looked shocked. "You don't think that he—" "What else? What do you think, Liz?" "Maybe. Don't know." "Sarah, any comments?" Sarah sat on the edge of her chair. Not from excitement, she was just in pain. She said, "No comment. Will thought Jed's position at work might take a nosedive. Perhaps to the very bottom. Fine." Before Will and Sarah left, Liz pulled him aside to talk. "Will, I hope you can find the strength to forgive Sarah. No extra spanking." Will blushed. "Did you hear?" "Oh, yeah." Edna, too. "Liz, she really screwed up. I don't want to live my whole life thinking about her and about what she was going to do to this idiot. But he is her weak point, I think. And you humiliated him so thoroughly yesterday that the threat has certainly been eliminated. Give her a chance, please. Maybe I'll do that. Let's see how it goes. And one more thing, huh? Last night. Not a word." "Okay." Will and Sarah left Pennsylvania. It was an eventful trip. On the way back, they started talking about it. She said, "Will, I let some teenage things hurt us. I apologize again. Are there any other teenage heartthrobs?" "No." "And Jed?" "Well, he ran away from you in Edna's blanket. I suppose after a while, I'll be able to laugh about it. Now it looks like a sad case. We can try to get back to square one, Sarah. But I must say that I will think about my defense. I'm scared to feel this way. I love you, Will. Only you. But I want to say something else." "What?" "If you sleep with my mother again, I will cheat on your bed." Will almost drove off the road. "And you will need to take a test. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.